Our pocket pistol series has been a study of both pocket-sized semi-autos and small-frame snub-nose revolvers. Either type of handgun can fill that role of allowing you to be armed while minimizing the burden of carrying the gun and keeping it concealed. Beyond that, they differ quite a bit in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. There are a lot of factors we could take into account here, but if we narrow it down to the most important ones, with a snub nose, you're getting superior reliability and easier access to the gun. And with a pocket pistol, you're trading those qualities in favor of a smaller gun that's going to be easier to conceal. Before we really dig into this, I want to define our terms because pocket pistol and snub nose are not clearly delineated technical terms. For the sake of this discussion, I'm going to consider a pocket pistol to be any semi-auto that's roughly the size of a Glock 42 or smaller, and chambered in calibers equal to or smaller than 380 ACP. Depending on who you ask, a snub nose could be any revolver with a barrel length under 3 inches. Today I'm talking about the more narrow subset of small frame lightweight snubbies with barrels around 2.5 inches or less. They're going to have frames made of polymer or aluminum or some other lightweight alloy. Primarily, I'm assuming something like a Smith & Wesson J-frame Airweight or Air Light model or a Ruger LCR. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on what I would consider to be the secondary factors when comparing pocket pistols and snubbies, but I'll touch on a few of them just briefly. A lot of times this discussion devolves into a debate about 380 ACP versus 38 Special. Historically, 38 is considered to have better ballistics, but neither of them are outstanding. Of course, there are other calibers in both platforms, like the various 32s and 22s. They're all relatively weak, and yet they all seem to work most of the time with good shot placement. I would not look to caliber as the deciding factor. I'd say the same thing about ammo capacity. You'll get about 6 to 8 rounds in a pocket pistol. Most snubbies are going to be 38s, and that will give you only 5 shots. If that makes you uncomfortable, you can go to one of the 22s or 32s and you'll get 6 to 8 rounds just like a semi-auto. Modern technology has allowed both pocket pistols and revolvers to become much lighter in recent years. Fully loaded pocket pistols typically weigh between 10 and 17 ounces. Polymer and alloy framed revolvers are usually between 12 and 19 ounces, so there's not much difference there. If cost is a major consideration for you, then pocket pistols are going to be very appealing with prices for several decent models starting between $200 and $300. But you don't have to spend a fortune to get a snub nose either. Basic models from Smith & Wesson and Ruger usually start between $350 and $400. Shootability is that intangible quality that describes how easy it is to shoot a particular gun well. It's usually some combination of felt recoil, trigger, and ergonomics. I do think shootability is important, especially if you plan to practice with this gun. But with a few exceptions, both pocket pistols and snub-nose revolvers together are among the least shootable handguns around. That's less the case with some of the heavier models and the lighter calibers, but overall, shootability is not a great criteria for making generalizations about these two categories of guns. So now let's get to the major distinguishing factors. I believe the biggest advantage a snub-nose revolver has over a pocket pistol is reliability. Now, a few people might be surprised to hear me say that because despite being a revolver enthusiast, I have often gone out of my way to point out just how unreliable they can be sometimes, especially when you compare full-size revolvers to full-size semi-autos. Revolvers require more maintenance to keep them running if you shoot them a lot. They don't hold up too well against hard impacts or being dropped, and new production revolvers seem to be highly prone to manufacturing defects. However, under the chaotic conditions of a real-world fight, a snub-nose in good condition is a lot more dependable than a small semi-auto. Like I discussed last time, small semi-autos are uniquely susceptible to feeding issues when you try to shoot them with anything other than a perfect textbook grip and stance at the range. In the real world, people often get taken off guard by a deadly threat and then they go for their gun and weird things happen. And here's a great example from a force-on-force exercise I observed a few months ago. This guy has just drawn his sim gun and he's shooting at an attacker, and check out that grip he's got. He has somehow managed to hook the middle finger of his firing hand around the front of the trigger guard, and more importantly, his support hand thumb is wrapped over the top of the slide. Now this guy knows how to grip a gun properly, but somehow he got all tangled up in his draw stroke. By some miracle, that simunition Glock didn't actually malfunction in that scenario, but I can almost guarantee if you try to fire a Glock 42 or an LCP that way, you'd get one shot off and then you'd have a failure to extract. A lot of times, these small guns are carried deep inside a pocket or in a belly band or somewhere that's not always real easy to get to, and that increases your chance of getting a suboptimal grip on the gun, and that's going to compromise the ability for the gun to operate. The revolver, on the other hand, this thing doesn't care how you grip it, especially a double action only model like this with a shrouded hammer. If you can pull the trigger, you can make it go bang. It'll fire from inside a pocket. It'll fire if it's pressed up against the guy who's got you pinned on the ground. If it's a properly functioning revolver, just about the only way to make it stop mid-fight is to actually grab the cylinder and prevent it from turning. Otherwise, a Snubnose might just be one of the absolute best weapons you could have in your hand in a fight at contact distance. It's also one of the best guns you can have on you, period, if you need to get that gun out in a hurry. And that brings me to the next point, accessibility. This attribute is probably the one that is most often overlooked, but I think it should be near the top of the list of what you look for in a carry gun. If you ever have to use your gun to defend your life, there is a very good chance you won't actually have to fire it, but you will have to get it out. And you need to be able to do that without fumbling with cover garments or digging around in a pocket. I'm not saying you necessarily have to have a blindingly fast draw stroke, but ideally, deploying that gun is a deliberate, practiced action that you can do consistently and reasonably quickly while your brain is on autopilot. And this is where a snubby offers some advantages thanks to the size of the grip and the overall shape of the gun. Whether it's in a belt holster, an ankle holster, a pants pocket, or a purse pocket, or whatever, a Snubnose revolver has a grip that's easier to get your hand around than a pocket pistol. It's a bigger grip, and it doesn't have this obstruction on the back created by the slide and the beaver tail. So if you end up having to draw the revolver from an awkward angle, like something like that, you can still get a grip on it. And if it's a double action only revolver like this one, you don't have something that's going to get hung up if you draw it from inside a pocket. What I really like about the Snubbies is the grip angle. So if I want to go for maximum concealment with something like a belly band type holster, I can bury most of the gun way below the waistline and still have enough grip sticking up to get my fingers around the front strap and draw it the way I normally would. If I do that with a pocket pistol, I still have the back of that slide that I have to conceal, and if I need to draw, I'm going to have to slip my hand in between my waistband and the gun. Now, I can certainly do that, it's just slower and less consistent. Okay, so now let me balance the reliability and accessibility argument with the issue of size, because a carry gun doesn't do you any good if you don't actually carry it. Like I mentioned earlier, pocket pistols and Snubnose revolvers are pretty close in terms of weight, but pocket pistols tend to be much smaller. If you hold a snubby up against a big pocket pistol like the Glock 42, the revolver is slightly taller and longer, and the cylinder makes it significantly wider. The difference is really stark next to a smaller pocket pistol like the Kel-Tec P32. It's not even close. I actually don't own a pair of pants that will conceal a J-frame in a front pocket without looking like I've got a big tumor growing out of the front of my leg, but I could stick a P32 in the pocket of my gym shorts without tipping anyone off. Now, next to full-size or even compact double-stack handguns, pocket pistols and snubbies all look pretty small, and it might look like I'm kind of splitting hairs by making this size comparison, but depending on your situation, some seemingly minor differences in the size or the shape of the gun can determine whether it's printing through your clothing or what lengths you're going to have to go to in order to make sure that gun stays concealed all day. It's really easy to be dismissive of the idea of carrying a smaller handgun when a gun that we think of as being only marginally bigger might be a superior fighting tool. That's especially true for those of us who have the luxury of dressing like slackers most of the time, or who don't live and work in places that are hostile to concealed carry. It's common for people like us to take the myopic perspective that convenience is the only reason somebody would choose to carry a smaller gun, and if you value your life more than you value comfort, you will carry a more capable firearm. Now, there are a lot of flaws with that line of thinking, but especially the failure to consider that everyone else's day-to-day reality probably doesn't look like yours. A few times in this series, I have mentioned the idea of non-permissive environments. Those are places where it's not illegal to carry a gun, but there could be some serious consequences if someone found out you were doing it. The typical example is an employer with a strict no guns policy where you risk being fired if you are found to be in violation of that policy. But the situation could be a lot more subtle than that. Like, it could be a real problem if you have to dress differently than everyone around you in order to conceal your gun. You can't walk around with pants that are 2 sizes too big or your shirt always untucked in an office where everyone is expected to wear formal business attire. For some of you guys, your whole town or state is basically a non-permissive environment. If anyone suspects that you might have a gun on you, permit or no permit, they're calling the cops. You might not actually get arrested, but that's probably not the kind of harassment you want to deal with when you're at the dentist office or out buying a gallon of milk. So personally, except for some very specific situations, when I want a small gun, I much prefer a Snubnose because of the reliability and accessibility issues. I can find a way to conceal one in almost any environment I'm going to be in, and I'm confident what I can do with it. But I'm not going to say that they're always better, because my once in a while exception scenario might be your everyday scenario. A pocket pistol that's been vetted and test fired can be pretty reliable most of the time, and with a well thought out and practiced carry method, it can be easily accessible too.